Pleasant good night to everyone, and welcome to another session. Week five. It's been a well compact week. The last 4 weeks would have been well compact, and I just want to welcome everyone to this series, the Master Plan for Healthy Community. If you're visiting us for the first time, please in the chat let us know where you're coming from. For those who are visiting us for the first time, we welcome you. For those who our regular viewers, a big welcome to you. And for those who visiting us for the first time, can you just post something in the chat? Let us know where you're viewing us from. If you're visiting us for the first time, any first timer, you can just leave something in the chat. I guess it's all regular viewers. Please, if you don't mind, let us know where. Well, as I said, there's nobody or there's no first timer. Please keep your mic mute while our presenter for tonight is being while the message is being presented to us. Our presenter for tonight is Andrea Edwards. Let me give you a bit of background about her. Andrea's background is psychology. She's a trained integrated psychotherapist, currently studying neuroscience of mental health. She has over 10 years experience of working in the field of mental health and over 6 years experience delivering one-to-one direct therapy. Indirect therapeutic work with children, young people, adults, family, couples. Currently, she coordinates therapeutic services for numbers of schools across the Northwest, as well as delivering therapeutic intervention. She's probably an Seventh-day Adventist, a member of the Preston Seventh-day Adventist Church, a wife and mother of two, Paul, age 8, and Livy, just turned 1. Tonight, I have no doubt that it's just gonna be compact as the first 4 weeks. This week we're gonna look at depression, mental health, that big monster in some of us lives. I have that issue to deal with, and I'm just looking forward to this presentation tonight. But I just want to leave a quote with you before we go into Andrea. And it's from Lisa Oliveira. She said, just because no one else can heal or do your inner work for you doesn't mean you can or should or need to do it alone. That brings us to this junction where we have Andrea, who's going to unfold and find some of the answers that have been troubling us about this issue of mental health. Andrea, welcome tonight. Over to you.
Hi, thank you. Thanks as well, everyone, for joining. I'm going to share my screen, and then we're going to get started. Okay. Can everyone see my screen okay? Maybe just put a message in the okay, great, good. Okay, so it's the Mind That Matters, looking at mental health. And this week we're going to cover quite a few different topics. So we're going to cover depression tomorrow. On Tuesday, we're going to look into anxiety. And on Wednesday, we're going to look at children and young people's mental health. So we are going to look at depression and anxiety more general tomorrow and Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, we're going to look at it more tailored to children and young people. And then on Thursday, we're going to look at coping strategies, the 5 ways to well-being, mindfulness, looking at the link to God's plan and what support there is out there. There will also be opportunities on Thursday for questions as well. As we go through, if people have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. Hopefully we will have time today as well to answer questions. And as we go through each day, we'll also answer questions. But just in case we don't have enough time to go through all the questions, if there are, if there are a lot of questions, I make sure there's enough time on Thursday that we can do that. Today is actually going to be more of an overview of mental health, and I'm going to set the foundation that the rest of the topics are going to build on. So don't worry too much if I've not covered too much in terms of preventative measures or what you could do about mental health, because that will be looked at throughout the week. Okay. So we're gonna start with, I know last week Andre mentioned quite a bit about the mind last Wednesday, for those who are regular. For anyone who's new, I would really advise you to watch the session on Wednesday last week, because Andre he spoke quite a bit about the mind. So today I'm not going to go into that much detail. I'm just going to kind of do a general overview. So before I start, can anyone tell me, based on what you can remember or what you know, what is the mind? So type in the chat. Yeah, what is the mind? When you think of the mind, what comes to mind? I don't actually know if I can see the chat box. Okay, it's not showing up on my side. Or you could shout out maybe, unmute yourself for a second. Like, what is the mind? What can you remember from what Andre mentioned?
I don't know if Andre mentioned this, but when I think of the mind, I think of the scripture that says, let this mind be in you. And so we need to have the mind of Christ.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Anything else? Thank you for that as well. Okay, we'll move on.
Your thoughts, the way of thinking, the way you think.
Yeah. So thank you both. So yeah, our mind is basically our thoughts, our perception, memory, our conscious and unconscious cognitive processes. So the way we think, and it's also the way information is processed. So information comes through our mind from our 5 senses, and the way that information is processed in combination with how it's interpreted. So that is our mind. I really like this definition, so I've included it. So the dictionary's definition is, it's the element of a person that enables them to be aware of the world and their experiences. So element is actually referring to an essential part of something abstract. So the element of a person that enables them to be aware of the world and their experiences. Okay. So I've got another question. If I was to, I know everyone's on mute, sorry, on mute and their videos are off. But if I was to say point to your brain and point to your mind, where would you actually be pointing to? So if I was to say point to your brain, show me where your brain is, where would you point to?
To the crown of your head.
Okay, yeah. And then if I was to say point to your mind, show me your mind, where would you be pointing to?
The frontal lobe.
Frontal lobe.
Okay. So we'd basically be still pointing to our head, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
So our brain is basically pointing to our head, and our mind is also pointing to our head. So then that leads to my next question. Is our mind and our brain the same? And I know Andre touched on this last week as well, so I'm not going to go into too much information about this. But is our mind and brain the same?
I'm not too sure, because the brain is probably like the physical makeup of the brain. The mind is actually, I think, like the I don't know. I'm not too sure, to be fair, but I think the brain is actually the physical aspect, the name of the organ, and then the mind is what happens inside the brain.
Okay, yes, I like that. Yeah, definitely. So just like a computer, I think last week Andre used a mobile phone as an example. But if you think of a computer, the keyboard or the monitor screen and the mouse is actually the hardware. So it's the physical aspect of the computer. But in terms of what actually makes the computer works in terms of turning on and run all these programs online, it's actually a software. So in a similar sense, our brain is actually the physical organ of the human body. Okay, it's a physical organ of the human body. And the mind is almost invisible. It's like the control center. It's, or should I say the brain is like the control center, but the mind is what's doing the controlling. So similar to a computer software, the mind is actually, you can't really see it, okay? So my final question before I go any deeper, why then is our mind so important? So based on what our mind actually is, why is it so important? Or is it important? Is our mind important?
If you didn't have
Yes,
carry on, sorry.
yes, it's important because it's part of why or how we make decisions about things, our lives, and everything about us.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. And someone else was going to say something as well.
I was going to say, like, if you haven't got a mind, then you just like a shell.
Yeah.
You know, like, you wouldn't have no, like you said, like an operating system, if you like.
Exactly. So I've got a brain model here, which is the shape of a brain, but there's no mind in this. So it's just a dead shell really without a mind. So you're both right. That's why the mind is so important. Which comes on to what I'm going to talk about next. So when you think about, our mind is made up of our thoughts, our thinking, and the way we perceive and interpret things. You can then understand why it's so important. In Proverbs 23:7, it says, "For as he thinketh in his heart," and again, like Andre mentioned last week, heart is actually referring to the mind. So is he. So that is how powerful our way of thinking is, because the way we think pretty much defines who we are. It defines what we do. It defines how we feel. And I've got a good example a personal example with this. When I think I did my driving around 19. And the first time I was doing when I started doing my driving test, I think after only doing a few lessons, my instructor actually said, "Oh, you're definitely ready for your test." Now, I decided to do my driving as a surprise for my auntie who brought me up. She didn't know that I was doing my driving lesson. So I saved up and I thought, okay, I'm going to do my driving lesson. And then I wanted to surprise her by bringing home my test certificate when I passed. When it just happened that the lesson before my test, I was actually being picked up from home. So she knew then that I was doing my driving. When she found out that I was doing my driving lessons, I actually thought she'd be really happy and she'd be really proud. But she was so anxious, and because of her level of anxiety, which was brought on by her thoughts, and her thoughts were, "Oh my gosh, she's going to kill someone. She's going to get into a car and she's going to kill someone." And she actually said those words. She said, you can't be driving. It's it's something that can kill people. You'll end up in prison. Those were her words. And even though it was coming from a really good place, because it was coming from a place of love and safety, she wanted to keep me safe, it was her irrational thought process that was influencing the way she was feeling and then her behavior towards me. Right up until that day, I've been doing my lessons fine, no problems. That day, straight after we ended up actually having an argument. Straight after that, I went into the car, and after about 10 minutes, my instructor pulled the emergency brake, which kind of shocked me. I didn't understand, why is he pulling the brake? I've not made a mistake. And then he looked at me and he said, "You're like a completely different person. You're not the person who I've been teaching all this time. Even my first lesson was a lot better than that lesson." And that was how powerful our thought process, that our mind is. So based on the way my auntie was and all the things she had said, that then fed into me and my thinking, and which impacted on the way I was feeling, which was really anxious. And then obviously my behavior, so the way I was driving the car was clearly not the way my instructor was used to me driving. And at that point, he actually said, "I'm worried about you doing your test tomorrow." Whereas the lesson before that, he was saying, "You're more than ready for your test." So yeah, that is why our mind is so important. For the way we think in our heart, so is he. Dr. Leaf, who wrote the book Switch on Your Brain, also said in one of her quotes, "As we think, we change the physical nature of our brain." So the way we think is so powerful, it can actually change the physical nature of our brain. And as we consciously direct our thinking, we can actually rewire the patterns in our brain and replace them with, if we've got toxic thoughts, we can replace them with healthy ones. And again, it goes the other way. If you're someone who had healthy thoughts, and if you're in an environment that is full of negativity, over time, that is also going to influence your thought process, and it's going to change the physical nature of your brain. Dr. Leaf also went on to saying, when you think, you build thoughts, and these become physical substances in your brain. So again, like imagine if you had a massive field of grass across the road, and there's no path. But then you start walking there every day. You start walking through the field at the same spot every day. Eventually, that is going to create a path, and that is what we do in our brains. So our minds are really important. It's really important because it can influence our behavior, and it can also influence the behavior of others as well. So similar to a sponge, our brain is like a sponge. What you feed it, it kind of soaks it up. If you put a sponge in water, as soon as you take it up, the sponge is going to be dripping with so much water that you have to kind of rinse it out for it to be dry. So when we talk about mental health is actually the health of our minds. According to the World's Health Organization, mental health is a state of well-being, and it's a state of well-being in which individuals realize their own abilities and they can cope with normal stresses of life. They can produce productive work, and they're able to make a contribution to their society. So that is what mental health is, and that's what we're going to be focusing on over the next week. one of the most common misconceptions is that mental health, when you think about mental health, a lot of people tend to think about mental problems like mental illness, mental disorders. There's not as much stigma nowadays, but there is still a lot of stigma out there in terms of what mental illness and disorders are. And most times when people mention mental health, they think of a problem. They think of, oh, someone's ill or someone's mad. Yeah. But we all have mental health, and just like physical health, our mental health is just as important. The Department of Health has predicted that 1 in 4 of us will experience a mental health condition at some point in our lives. And some of these conditions will be things like anxiety, depression, or psychosis. Psychosis could be, like bipolar, schizophrenia, those kind of conditions. So another misconception as well is, you're either mentally ill or you're mentally well. Most people see, when they think about mental health, I've heard it so many times in my role. Either someone is mentally unwell or people are mentally well. There's no in between. And today we're going to look at mental health as a continuum rather than either you're ill or you're well. So there are many continuum kind of plans out there, and or zones, should I say. One of my favorite is the Working Mind, which has 5 zones of mental health, and it's inspired by, like I said, the Working Mind, but in Canada. And what I really like about it is, again, it's that continuum. It's not viewing mental health as one or the other. Just like physical health, in some areas of physical health, someone could be unwell. They might have a leg injury, but everything else is fine. Whereas someone might be so unwell physically, they can't get out of bed. It's very similar with mental health. And when we're looking at positive mental health, so the positive end of the spectrum is when someone is excelling in what they're doing. So they're really cheerful, they're really happy, things are going really well, they can cope with the day-to-day demands and stresses, and they're performing really well in everything that they desire or want to do. When we think of the opposite end, where someone is really in crisis, they're really anxious, and just again, like the physical health, if someone is so unwell they can't get out of bed, you can also be so mentally unwell you can't get out of bed. So again, that could be extreme anxiety or low mood, to the point that it's affecting your ability to sleep. And we're not talking like 1 day or 2 days. It could be days, it could be weeks, it could be months of no sleep, and not having an appetite to eat as well. And so obviously that's going to start impacting on your physical health. So like some of the, when we move into thriving, so exceeding is pretty much when you're excelling in everything. So that's the top end, but just below that, we're looking at thriving, someone who's got normal, healthy state of mental health. They're not really free from troubles, but they're coping with it well. They know how to cope, or they know how to let go of what's not in their control. And they're able to still do, meet their basic needs like sleep and eat, go to work, have a social life. someone who's surviving is basically in a state of their mind is unsettled, so they're not able to switch off much. They may be, they may be really anxious about something, so they can't really focus on what they're doing. They might be really forgetful about what their, day-to-day stuff or appointments. But they're just about surviving. And someone who's struggling is someone who, they've got that much anxiety going on that they can barely manage with life. Their concentration is poor, their energy is really low, and their work is suffering, but they're still managing to work and to do the day-to-day stuff. But they're really struggling. It's almost a lot of effort to even just get out of bed. Someone who's, like I mentioned before, is in crisis, that's where most people in crisis tend to get a diagnosis of something, of mental health condition, and it could be something like major depression or anxiety, or even schizophrenia, because they're in that much crisis. Before I come on to, sorry, let me just move up, go back. The statistics in the UK, I am going to cover more the continuum in more detail as we go through over the next few days, because I know sometimes one of the common questions is people always ask, if you're mentally unwell or if you get a diagnosis, does that mean you've got that for life and you're not able to then have a normal life? And the answer to that would be no. It doesn't mean it doesn't mean that you're unable to, or you won't be able to have a normal life in the future. But at that moment in time, you may be, you may have a mental illness, but people can move up or down the spectrum based on what situation they face or even environment. Someone could go from, excelling right down to crisis point. If, let's say, for example, like Job in the Bible, if I was to lose everything today, like all my loved ones, material stuff I'm not too fussed about, but I'm pretty sure that would still cause me a lot of anxieties, or probably make me really stressed. But if I was to lose all that, and as well as the people I really care about, I could probably go from, let's say, I'm mentally really well to crisis point. Looking at the statistics of mental health problems, and this is just purely in the UK, the suicides, I'll come on to suicide and self-harm in a minute, but at least, like I said before, 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health problem. 1 in 6 people report experiencing a common mental health problem like anxiety and depression in a given week in England. And 1 in 5 people have had suicidal thoughts. In terms of self-harm, 1 in 14 people self-harms, and 1 in 15 people attempt suicide. And we're going to look more at self-harm and suicide when we're looking at children and young people, because the statistics in terms of, death in our young people, self-harm and suicide is really high. So I'm going to look at that in more details when we're looking at children and young people on Wednesday. Women are more likely to have suicidal thoughts and to actually make suicidal attempts than men. But what I find really interesting is men are actually 3 times more likely to take their lives than women. So women are more likely to have the thoughts and to actually make attempts, but men are 3 times more likely to take their lives than women. The figures that I've just mentioned is actually taken from a survey in 2014. The links is at the end of the presentation, which will be emailed out to people if they want a copy. And the survey did exclude quite a number of people as well, because it only looked at people aged 16 and over, and those living in private housing, and obviously people living in England and not Wales. So it excluded quite a lot of people, those in hospitals, prisons, sheltered housing, people who are sleeping rough. So yeah, it's excluding a lot of people, which means the figures are likely to be higher than what's been mentioned. And also it's to bear in mind, this was 7 years ago in 2021 now, and this is figures and data from a 2014 survey. Reports from both England and Wales suggest that approximately 1 in 8 adults with a mental health problem are currently getting some kind of treatment. But the most common treatment is psychiatric medication. Personally, I'm not against medication. I think medication is useful, but for me personally, it's not my first avenue. That's not where I would go first. I think medication treats the symptoms rather than the underlying cause, but at the same time, I do understand, depending on what the mental health disorder is, medication might be needed as well as another type of treatment, like maybe talking therapy. But yeah, again, medication for me, it's treating the symptoms. And going back to, I think everyone probably mentioned the Ministry of Healing, page 127. When we think about disease, and disease being an effort of nature to free the system from conditions that result from a violation of the laws of health, when we're thinking about it in that sense, it makes sense then to look at, okay, what are the causes of mental health problems? What are the underlying causes? And we're going to look at that more in details over the week. But again, it comes back to violating one or more of God's laws of health. And I'll, over the week, we'll look at, I know the other presenters have mentioned about how the physical health also impacts on mental health, and mental health also impacts on physical health. And when things go wrong, they go wrong in the cells first. So it's not two separate things. They're both interlinked and they both impact on each other. So looking at now whether mental health, it seems from the reports and the data right there today, it seems that mental health problems are increasing. But I question, and it is mental health problems are increasing. And I think there's a lot of things to contribute to that, such as, for example, technology. As great as technology is, it's also, in my opinion, it's also a cause for that, a factor that also influences mental illness. I think more and more people are isolated in comparison to maybe years ago. A good example I can remember when I was growing up, we didn't watch so much TV. I spent a lot of my childhood playing outside. From what I can remember, the games that would invent. But nowadays, a lot of our children are indoors, whether it's summer or winter. A lot of our children are indoors, and that's to do with, so many factors. Safety is another one. Technology. So many of the kids that I'm working with at the moment, for example, it's all about these online games. And just think, going back to the 8 laws, if our young people are spending more and more time indoors, and they're growing up and becoming young adults and adults who then repeat that cycle of spending more and more times indoors, maybe go to work, come back. Again, a lot of things is indoors. We're violating the natural laws of God. We're not spending enough time outside. We're not getting enough sunshine. We're not getting enough walk or fresh air. And those were things that we're getting automatically as a kid, you know, growing up. We were always outside, whether it's raining, whether it's sunny. We're just always outside. So for me, that's one of the many causes in terms of mental health problems increasing. However, another thing that I thought was really important to highlight is the fact that there's a lot more awareness out there about mental health problems or conditions. There's a lot more information being shared, and overall the stigma is reducing. So the stigma is still there, but it's reducing. And with with stigma reducing, it means people are now feeling more confident to report or to put their hand up and say, yes, I'm actually struggling. So between 1993 and 2014, the amount of people with common mental health problems went up by 20%. Again, that could be, like I said, you know, it could be the fact that people are feeling more confident to share that information, but also the way society is changing as a whole as well. The percentage of people reporting severe mental health symptoms in any given week increased from 7% in 93 to over 9% in 2014. But again, what I find really interesting was the number of young women reporting common mental health problems have been going up. And that says a lot as well, because, you know, if women are reporting more common mental health problems, then that also kind of leaves it open for them to get support. Whereas if men aren't reporting or sharing, you know, that they are experiencing mental health problems, they're less likely to get any kind of support or treatment. And that could partly explain the reason why men are 3 times more likely to commit suicide than women. Again, since 2018, suicide numbers have gone up, but I am really, you know, I'm mindful of the fact that the rules changed in 2018 recording causes of death. Prior to that, suicide wasn't actually death by suicide wasn't actually recorded as death by suicide. So that only started in 2018, which could partly explain why the numbers in suicide have gone up. But having said that, there is still a clear increase in the number of men again, and the number of people under 25 taking their own lives since 2018. People reporting self-harm went up by 62% between the years 2000 and 2014. Again, doubled compared to what it was before. And people reporting having had suicidal thoughts within the past year went up by 30% between the years 2000 and 2014. So again, all this kind of suggests that people are really struggling to cope with mental health problems. But at the same time, it also shows that people are sharing more than before as well. So another question who would you say is affected, who's most at risk to be affected by mental health conditions? And feel free to just maybe unmute for a second. Who's most at risk?
I would say young people.
Okay. Young people. Anyone else?
Between the ages of 30 to 50 for men.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, all that is correct. But also the Black and Black British people. So in comparison to white British people, Black or Black British is 23% more likely to experience a common mental health problem in a given week. 23% in comparison to 17%. Young women aged 16 to 24, which is over a quarter of young women 16 to 24 are also more likely to report and to have a mental health problem in a given week. And this is in comparison to the 17% of adults out there. Around 40% of people in England who have overlapping problems, including, sorry about that. Over 40% of people in England who have overlapping problems. And what we mean by overlapping problems are like homelessness, drug misuse, or contact with the criminal justice system. They are more likely as well to have a mental health problems. And that's what we call double or multiple disadvantage. And a lot of these are linked to, factors such as social inequality, I can't say it now, equality, social inequality and disadvantage, discrimination, social exclusion, trauma. We're going to talk a bit more about trauma when we look at children and young people, and difference in physical health. I've got a short video that I wanted to share, and we're going to look at, I'm going to have to come off this presentation to share that video because for some reason it wasn't playing in this. So I am going to stop sharing my screen for a second. And then I'm going to share this video. Okay. So this video was completed by Mind, the mental health charity, and it was for, Black History Month. But it is, it was so mind-blowing when I was listening to it, even though I've been in mental health for so long. Just hearing real life experiences was still really mind-blowing. So just play that.
As a Black girl in a racist society, you kind of learn to hate yourself.
Can I just check that you can hear it?
Yeah, it could be a little bit, just a little bit louder.
A bit louder. Okay. Let's see.
Kids used to always make fun of my hair. He said that it looked like I was electrocuted. I never let my hair back as a child. I'd always try to make my hair look like a bit more Eurocentric. I thought that was beauty, and wherever my hair was just ugly. I wanted to bring more back. That's what I used to say. As a child, I literally.
Andrea.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you start the video again, stop sharing your screen. If when you share your screen, there's two options at the bottom of that window that come up, say optimize for optimize audio or something like that. If you click those two buttons and then share the screen and then play, it should sound
okay. So sorry, say that again. So I've stopped sharing, then go to share again.
Yeah, and then at the bottom, can you see there's like two options? Optimize for. Can you see that? So it should say share sound and then optimize for video clip.
Or optimize for audio.
I don't seem to have that. Yeah, Matt, let me have a look again. Okay, 1 minute. Let's see if it will.
Yeah, it should be on that.
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
sorry.
make sure
yeah.
those both of them are ticked, and then share and then play. Yeah, it should sound better.
Let's try again.
As a black girl in a racist society, you kind of learn to hate yourself. Kids used to always make fun of my hair. They said that it looked like I was electrocuted. I never let my hair be natural as a child. I'd always try to make my hair look like a bit more Eurocentric. I thought that was beauty, and whatever my hair was ugly. I wanted white girl hair, is what I used to say. As a child, I literally hated myself. I hated my skin. I thought I was inherently wrong or bad. I would get into the bath and I'll try to scrub my skin off, scrub my darkness off of me because I thought it was dirt. And children can be really mean. So they'll come and they'll bully you about your dark skin and your frizzy hair and this and that, or why are your gums that color? Even why are your lips that color? You know, you just felt like othered. After I left school, I became the bully. Like, I was the one bullying myself. So I'm just trying to unlearn how I was taught to hate myself.
Around 2017, I was invited to LA to attend E3, which is the world's biggest video game convention. And it was around the same time, coincidentally, as Trump's travel ban. And because I was born in Sudan, that automatically meant I was not allowed in the country. I was seen as a threat to the country. And I remember trying to apply for a visa on my phone and being rejected. And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, everything I've ever worked for, everything I've ever done, everything who I am has been completely negated, demolished based on my race. I remember that fear and that feeling of dejection sticking with me for an entire month, not knowing if I was gonna get that visa or not. Until I got through the embassy, and luckily I did. But the fear, the feeling of sadness, and it never left me, it never will. I never know when again my race or something that I have no control over will dictate everything.
Colorism has affected my life in many ways, many unconscious ways that I didn't know affected me until this day. Compared to other girls with lighter skin tones, black people, we are often treated differently. And it's made me have a distrust in not only authority figures, but myself. In primary school, I was quite an overachiever and I, loved taking part in the school's activities. I was a bit of a goody two-shoes, so I did my homework. I was part of the school orchestra, so I played the recorder and the clarinet. I remember coming back from a music lesson and this girl just stopped me. She made me drop my folder and my recorder on the floor and just started trying to provoke me. She was a lot stronger than me, so I had to fight back, and after that she just told the teacher that I attacked her. When my head teacher didn't believe me over a mixed race girl, it affected me in a lot of ways. It just made me feel like really alone. I felt that I wasn't able to really have a voice, and it didn't matter if I was doing well at school or not doing well at school. I was always going to be seen as this angry black woman.
In the black community, there are certain words that we don't use. I know growing up in Jamaica, I never heard the word mental health. We all have it, but not everybody understands what it is. I was going through a difficult period at time with a divorce. Depression came in my life as a result of those situations. I had a traditional white lady counselor. I don't know whether or not I gained a lot out of that, but when I did the second session with somebody from Sri Lanka, and he actually made me feel quite at ease because he started to talk about his own cultural background and how long he's been in practice and where he's worked before, etc. And that in itself was almost saying to me, I understand Many people have said to me, unless there are black practitioners in those services, people won't go. And a lot of black people are scared of mental health services because of this reason. We're not challenging people about their professional work. It's about the understanding of the cultural side of things. And you know, that is something that's missing from mainstream service.
All of these experiences have taught me to be a kind person, because I know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of hate.
I'm just so happy that I didn't chain myself for anyone, and I kept my differences. And the person I am today, I love her. I love who I am, and I wouldn't change that.
For me, to be the change I want to see in the world, I have to keep my identity and I have to be true to who I am.
The fact that there isn't enough services where there are cultural therapists and counselors, I'm using all my energy to try and help other people.
Presentation. But yeah, for me, that was really, really mind-blowing. Even though nothing that was mentioned, nothing that was mentioned in that was new or surprising, but it was really mind-blowing for me. Just hearing it all again, and real experiences. And again, that comes back to why only 6% in comparison to the white population. Black people are 6% higher at risk of experiencing mental health problems or conditions. Let me just get to where I was up to. And can I just check everyone can see my screen okay still?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay, great. Sorry, it restarted the entire presentation. So let me just get back to where I was up to. Okay. So yeah, so having said all that, it comes back to why the mind is so important. And when we're looking at, depression, that will be linked to, I will be linking depression to the, sorry about that. Sorry, my children are still up, so they keep opening the door. Yeah, so when we look at depression and anxiety, I will be linking that to the neuroscience, the biochemistry in terms of what's happening in the brains when we struggling with depression, when we're struggling with anxiety, what is actually happening in our bodies, but also looking at what are some of the factors, environmental factors that's influencing these things, depression and anxiety. And there are a lot of other mental health disorders and conditions, but just because of time, the ones that we're going to be focusing more on is depression and anxiety. And in that, I will look at the impact in terms of COVID. So as everyone will have guessed, the mental health conditions have actually gone worse since COVID. And when we look at prior to the time frame when COVID started, there was an increase from 2019 to April 2020 from 20.8% up to 29.5%. And again, those figures didn't show everyone in the UK. So that's just based on those who actually reported experiencing mental health problems. So my guess would be that, those figures would be higher. But we will look at this in more details when we're looking at anxiety and depression. In terms of where people can get support, I know Andre spoke about last week about our social networks. You know, it's so important to have good social networks around you and to communicate with them, or even to try and make social networks for those people who may not have that many. And we're going to look at that on Thursday when we look at the 5 ways to well-being. One of the 5 ways to well-being is connecting with others, but also connecting with God. If we cast all our anxieties onto the Lord, and if we really connect with him daily, that is going to in turn increase our godly trust in him. And if we have more trust in him, we're more likely to not worry, to believe the scriptures, to believe what he says, to believe that things will be okay, even when things don't seem like it will ever get better. Some other supports out there in terms of local supports, and again, we'll look at these in more detail when we're looking at depression and anxiety. The Samaritans is a really good charity. They've got a number that you can, a text service that you can ring day or night, and they're open 365 days a year. So if you don't have anyone you feel comfortable talking to about anything, you can talk to them confidentially. There are also self-help apps, that you yourself can actually track how you're doing by maybe answering a questionnaire about your day-to-day feelings or activity and your behavior. And based on that, it would also give recommendations on how you can support yourself better as well. Mental health charities such as Mind. Mind is a really big mental health charity in the UK. Bernardo's is another one, but Bernardo's is for children and young people. Mind is for both children and young people. Shout is a text service. You can, again, it gives you that confidential space to freely get support. And if you're someone who don't like talking, like verbally talking, it's a text service. So it's widened that area in terms of how you can seek support. The NHS as well, so another first point of contact could be your GP. Going to your GP. The NHS have got many services out there, but again, the demand on the NHS is so massive at the moment, and waiting list is really long. There's such a long waiting list, and it all depends on what the mental health condition is, or what the mental health disorder is. But the waiting list at the moment is so long when it comes to NHS. And with NHS, when we look at children and young people, we'll look at some of the barriers with the NHS, because there is a cutoff point where, I've heard parents say you almost have to be saying my child is dying before you can get into CAMHS. And CAMHS is the mental health service for children and young people within NHS. So it can be difficult at the same time getting support. And in terms of reference, so these are the list of reference that I've mentioned throughout this presentation. But if anyone wants the handout, they can have a copy of this. And tomorrow we'll look more into, we'll go a little bit deeper, but more tailored to depression as a mental health condition. And that brings it to the end of my presentation. Does anyone have any questions? I'm really sorry about the interruptions, by the way.
Thank you very much for such a lovely presentation. And it was very edifying to our minds. We have, please, if there's any questions, this is time to ask them. Please, after asking your questions, can you mute your mic? Is anyone?
I can actually see some questions in the chat now. Sorry, I think, is it?
I also have some here. When you've, I can. One that we have here is, what do I do if support doesn't help? You mentioned just a while ago, you can go to A, B, and C there for support, and there's a lot of support out there. But what do you do if those supports, if those support mechanism doesn't help?
Yeah. Okay. That's a really good question, because if already it's difficult enough to actually admit that, okay, there is a problem here. And I think admitting that is the first step. And if the next step is actually accessing support, and you're refused for whatever reason, it can then put you maybe further back. So I think in terms of if there isn't support, I would say keep trying and keep depending on the avenue. If your support network is, say, for example, friends and family, then I would say seek out a charity, mental health charity. There's a lot of links online now to do with, mental health, mental health problems, where you can actually speak to someone confidentially for free online. I will share some of these links as we go on as well. If it's to do with, you've tried talking to family, you've tried friends, you've tried charities, you've tried NHS, and there's just no immediate, pray. There is so much power in prayer. And I know some people here might not be Christians, but based on everything that's been covered over the past 4 or 5 weeks, prayer is so important. And when it seems like there's no options, there's no support, I would say pray.
Thank you very much. Another tricky question. How do I know if I'm unwell?
Okay, I like that question. We will cover that more tomorrow as well. But you know yourself well, or those close to you might know you well. So it's about listening to your body. I'll give an example. So when I'm probably moving down that continuum of becoming unwell, sometimes other people spot it before I do, and I can be in denial. I'll be like, nope, I'm fine. But listening to what people are saying, listening to what they're observing, because clearly your behavior is communicating something that you're not aware of. You might even notice you're doing things that you don't usually do, out of the norm for you. You might all of a sudden suddenly be forgetting everything. When I'm becoming overwhelmed or again unwell, my keys could be right in front of me and I'll be searching everywhere for them. So there are always early signs. You might start feeling stress, but you might not be able to work out where is that coming from, but you're feeling it in your body. You might be struggling to sleep for some reason. There are little signs that you will notice that is different from the norm. And the earlier you intervene, the better it is. I sometimes, one of my, self-care for me is a big thing. I make sure I put that as a priority. It's not an option, self-care. But there are times when I probably think I'm Superwoman. And I would try and do everything. But then it'll get to the point where, and I'll be imagining being in the fast lane on a motorway, and people are telling me to slow down, and people are flashing the hazard lights, and I'm ignoring it, and I'm just going full blast. And then my body will tell me. So it'll get to the point where I physically have to rest. You know, I have to, I can't move. I'm sick for a good few days. And that's when I know that, okay, you're not well.
Yeah. Thank you. Good question. The young people we have in your presentation, you mentioned that the younger ones are prone to be affected by mental health. We have seen that social media is a big impact in some of their lives in that sense. And we always, as the older ones will say, you spend too much time on the social media, but social media is what is carrying them, but social media is also is the one that is destroying them. How do we balance that in terms of their mental health?
Okay. And when you say, how do we balance that in terms of their mental health, do you mean we as parents or as adults or as a community?
Holistic community.
Okay, so I'm going to start first with parents. And a book that I would recommend to everyone who's here is The Adventist Home. Not trying to force anything on anyone, but what I really love about The Adventist Home is it talks about the home prepares the young person for the world out there, for the next generation. We're basically creating our next generation. And I would say everything kind of starts in the home with the parents or the carers. Yes, social media is great because it's, you can be really successful via social media. Social media helped us during lockdown, but I think it would be parents need to also be wise or educate themselves around social media and how best to support their children with that. And that might simply be having a limit. It might simply putting those boundaries in place where they can only do X amount of things on social media, or they can only be on social media for a certain amount of time. I think it's really important to manage that and being boundaried with that. And now looking at it in terms of our young people, I know it's more difficult because obviously they go to school, they're on social media. I'm actually shocked at some of the things that my little girl watches on social media at school. Or even in after school clubs sometimes. And then they've got their peers. But I think before we can correct our children and young people, we need to connect with them. Relationship is really crucial. So if you connect with your young person and create that relationship with them so that they know that, everything you're doing is actually coming from a good place and you're not trying to ruin their life, they're more likely to take on board what you're saying, and to actually speak to them, speak to them about your concerns, show them that you do care. And if you're, sometimes we hide things from children and young people because we don't want them to carry our burden, and rightfully so. But sometimes it's also good to share with them, why you're concerned and how it can be damaging for them. So you're not just stopping something for the sake of it. You're doing it because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, thank you very much. You touched on the issue of racism, and this brings me to the question that someone just asked here. Racism has a massive impact on mental health. What could the church put in place to help? And they basically go further and they went further and taking into account that a lot of these institutions tend to refer Black people down the psychiatric route rather than counseling or child psychologists. And I'm looking at racism as not just one-sided, racism from both sides.
Yeah, I agree. In terms of the church, I think everything comes back to trying to, again, like with mental health, people are more open now because they're more aware of what mental health is. Like it mentioned in the video, a lot of people don't actually know what mental health is. It's a word we use so fluidly and often, but do people actually know what mental health is? A lot of people don't actually know what it is. And like I mentioned before, a lot of times people think of mental health, they think of a problem. So I think in terms of racism, everything comes back to educating. So the church could start by educating the community on racism, and like you say, not just one-sided. Talking about cultural differences, because a lot of times that's the barrier, the lack of understanding around culture. And I've got a perfect example with that. My auntie, she raised me and she died of dementia. And when just before she passed away, she came home before she went back into hospital. And one of her routines for years has been to take fruits up to her room with a knife, and she'll cut her fruits and she'll have fruits in her room. She doesn't go to bed, she'll go to her room from like maybe 6:30, and she'll go up with a knife and fruits. And when she came home, it was a day before she actually the same day she ended up back in hospital. When she came home, she did the same routine. And when the ambulance came, because she had to go back into hospital, she was coming down the stairs and she had the knife and a plate in her hand. And as soon as they came in, I basically said, "Oh no, it's fine. That's her norm." And they completely disregard that, and straight away they called for backup. We had 9 police officers within minutes.
Mm-hmm.
My auntie was at the time 83. So I don't think she needed 9 police officers. But they weren't willing to listen. And it was just that lack of understanding in terms of, for her, culture was a big thing, what she did. And it's not just about culture in terms of maybe Caribbean or, we could have two white British living next door to each other, and they could still have completely different cultures. They could still have, so I think helping the community to understand that and to educate them on the differences with us, or with other races.
Yeah.
I think everything starts with education.
Right. Thank you very much. On the issue of belonging to a group, we have the stages of forming, norming, storming, forming. Within that cycle, we're going to have a sense of belonging. If you're not feeling like you're not belonging to a group, or you're feeling that sense of someone who want to push you out, or you're not feeling like our society is very trendy and our young people are very trendy. So if I'm not doing A, I'm not feeling as though I'm a part of that group. How does that affect our mental health, the young people mental health? Because sometimes that can lead to like probably any one of us committing suicide, because that feeling sense of belonging.
Yeah, massively. And that is actually part of my presentation on Wednesday, because the suicide, the self-harm rate in children, young people is so high, and the suicide as well is so high, suicide attempts. And a lot of the suicide attempts is when the children, young people go off to university and they're away from their families, where they felt belonged if they did. And now they go off to university, and it can be really isolating. It can be really lonely if you're excluded, whether it's intentionally or not. It can be really lonely, and yeah, it massively impacts on our mental health. So I think if you're not feeling belonged, it's looking at, okay, what can I do? Because we can't change what other people do, and we can't. We can try to, support others to understand how their behavior or what they're doing, or systems to understand how they're impacting on someone else, but we can't physically change what they do. We can only change how we respond to that. And I think if say, for example, if I was feeling really isolated and not belonging, I would then look at, okay, where can I make a connection, and where do I feel belonged, and building on that so that I have that strong connection still, because that would be one of my protective factors.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you very much for those answers. If there's no other, is there any other questions? If not, we just want to thank you, Andrea, for such a well-presented topic tonight of one of the mountains in our lives, and we just want to thank you for such a well-presented presentation tonight. Tomorrow, I have no doubt that you're going to dive deeper and deeper into this issue of depression, or the mental issues affecting us, whether in our homes, whether at school, work, wherever it is. We'll be touching some of them this week. For those who are afraid of typing or asking any questions on our live stream, you can, if you have any questions that's pounding on your mind that you just want to ask privately, you can touch base with Andre Crawford, our host, main host for tonight, for this whole series, the Master Plan for Healthy Community. You can just drop him a message on the chat here. And also remember, this program is being streamed live on YouTube, and you can go back and rewatch all of these presentations. And if you have any questions, you can ask us sometime in the week coming up, some days in the week coming up here. Thank you very much. Thank you for everyone for coming out. Andrea, thank you very much again. And tomorrow it's at 7. Remember, for those who are not in our UK zone, remember the clock went back and went back an hour. So if you're in Jamaica or the Caribbean, it's an hour earlier. So just remember that. So again, thank you. But before we close, let's have a short word of prayer. Small heads and goes eyes. Thank you, Lord, for such a well-presented topic this afternoon, Lord. You know this is a mountain in our life, but Lord, you have just bruised the surface for us tonight, Lord. And as we go into the week, we'll get better and better, and we'll dive deeper into some of the issues around mental health that is affecting us. Lord, we just want to thank you and praise you for all the things you have done. Thank you for all the wonderful things you've even done in the presenter's life tonight, Lord. And thank you. We just look forward to another presentation tomorrow, Lord, that will be well spirit-filled and ready for us tomorrow. Thank you for all that you have done. In most holy name I pray. Amen. Again, thank everyone.